Are you just riding on your parents' success at work and being lazy now? And you don't even have kids? Why did you leave my child alone? How did someone like you even manage to get married? What tricks did you use? My mother-in-law and sister-in-law never liked me. They always threw snide comments and spread false rumors. I'm Karen Williams, 35, married to John, who's turning 37 for 7 years. Since my dad passed away 6 years ago, we've been living with my mom. John is kind, and we get along well. Despite a peaceful home, my career has had its ups and downs, causing me stress. After college, I initially worked at my dad's company, but it wasn't the right fit. In the first year of marriage, I switched jobs, and it was a tough decision then, but I'm glad I made the change. I have 2 brothers who stuck with our father's company. Given my family background, it seemed natural for me to join eventually. The company specialized in electrical engineering, so I pursued and completed my degree in that field before joining my father's business. Since my whole family worked there, I never doubted that was my future. When I started, there were rumors that I got the job because of my father, which hurt. Colleagues distanced themselves when they knew I was the CEO's daughter. No matter how hard I worked, it was seen as riding on my parents' coattails, frustratingly similar to what my brothers faced. I worked hard to prove them wrong, climbing the ladder of success. My boss, despite being the CEO's daughter, was strict, ensuring my promotions were due to my efforts. However, achievements were tainted with accusations of favoritism, which got me down. After 3 years, I met my husband at work, disliked by female staff due to his competence, personality, and substantial income. We had met before at bookstores and libraries, chatting occasionally. It was a surprise when we ended up working together. Our shared love for reading quickly blossomed into a relationship, causing jealousy and gossip among my coworkers. During our time together, I met my husband's family, but my mother-in-law and sister-in-law disliked me. They'd make snide remarks about my supposed easy life and job privileges due to my father. They believed I coasted through life on my parents' success, enjoying a high salary because of them. However, my father, despite being kind-hearted, is strict at work and doesn't mix personal matters with business. He doesn't play favorites just because I'm his child. If I didn't have the skills, he wouldn't have hired me. I respect my father's judgment, and it frustrates me when others belittle it unreasonably. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law, especially the latter, criticize me for supposedly riding on coattails and resent my close relationship with my husband. They question how someone like me got married, implying I used tricks. My sister-in-law, dressed impeccably in high-end fashion, turns heads, but her sharp personality leads to short-lived romances. I later learned she confessed her feelings to my brother in college, but was turned down. During a family gathering, they recognized each other, and my brother shared this story with me. As his sister, I know he's earnest, hardworking, and considerate, with a flair for fashion that makes him popular with the ladies. My sister-in-law's frustration from being rejected seemed to make her harsher towards me. So, I decided to maintain some distance, especially when it was just my mother-in-law and sister-in-law around. Whenever I visited my in-laws and had tea, it tasted strange, as if something had been added intentionally. It wasn't obvious, but it seemed like my mother-in-law was serving unpleasant food to harass me. Initially, I thought it might be my imagination, but when she smirked and ridiculed me for not appreciating the taste, I realized it was deliberate. Both of them were always sour or mean, even when I tried to be friendly in front of others. I learned to navigate around them to avoid their snide remarks. When it came to the food at my in-laws, I politely ate as little as possible to avoid being rude. If you ask whether I lived happily after marrying my husband, I'd say not quite. Despite a good relationship with my husband, marriage brought more gossip at work. The workplace gossip got worse than when we were dating, and the ongoing harassment and sarcasm from my mother-in-law and sister-in-law gradually drained my spirit. While I found my work rewarding, the toxic environment made me question if this was okay. Contemplating my future more and more, my father's passing, and my brother becoming the CEO led to gossip about me being the CEO's sister. Already shocked by my father's death, my spirit was completely broken. I felt I could no longer work at the company, even though I had always imagined working there. Years of gossip and sarcastic comments had eroded my self-esteem, and I found myself crying easily without understanding the source of my sadness. I was truly at a loss. Seeing me in such a state, my mother and husband were genuinely concerned and took excellent care of me. With their support, I slowly began to recover and discussed my future with my mother. I had been considering trying a different job, but I felt like I lacked any special skills. Depressed, I voiced my concerns to my mother, asking if there was anything I could do. To my surprise, my mother said, "Karen, you've always loved reading and writing stories, haven't you? I think you'd be suited for a job that involves writing." Her words jogged my memory. It was true. I've always been an avid reader, excelled in liberal arts subjects, and enjoyed writing novels and poems. Encouraged by my mother, I started contemplating a career in writing. Upon reflection, I realized that a career in electrical engineering wasn't right for me. My mother had always advised me to choose a job I loved since my student days, but I didn't see it then. It seemed my mother understood me better than I understood myself. So, I decided to make a fresh start and aim to become a novelist, starting my career in writing. Being a beginner was tough, and I was using up my savings every day. I faced my computer continuously, writing. Initially fueled by the desire to prove others wrong, I now worked hard for myself, finding it more enjoyable despite the challenges. I dedicated most of my day to crafting stories, and by the second year, I was earning about as much as an average office worker. In the fourth year, one of my novels won an award and got published, allowing me to sign a contract with a publishing house, ensuring a stable flow of work. By the fifth year, thanks to a hit novel, I was earning more than my husband. My novels were even adapted into comics and dramas, ensuring a steady income. The journey was tough, but working as a novelist made me realize that my previous jobs weren't the right fit for me. However, my success wouldn't have been possible without the support of my mother and husband. As for my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, they doubted my success when they heard I became a novelist, making snide remarks about leeching off my husband. After my father-in-law passed, their comments worsened. Working mostly from home, they called me a nerd due to our high-rise luxury condo, assuming my husband covered all expenses. They believed I didn't contribute financially, despite explaining that the condo was my inheritance, and I split living costs with my husband. They continued their comments behind his back, adding stress to the situation. They'd also made rude remarks about me not having children, which started at 30 and has become increasingly tiresome as I approached 35 without any expectations. I faced discomfort from two individuals despite repeatedly explaining work matters to them. Seeking advice from my mother and husband, I decided to address the situation early on, learning from past experiences. Apart from my mother, as the two were part of my husband's family and behaved decently in front of him, I conveyed things to him in the gentlest terms possible. I told him he didn't have to deal with those two, and I would handle meetings or communications with them. Understanding my emotional struggles during the backbiting period, he tried to minimize my interactions with them out of concern. Thanks to his support, the instances of being subjected to their snide remarks lessened, though there were still moments when their malice affected me. Knowing I had allies in my mother and husband helped me quickly bounce back. Regarding the issue of not having children, my mother, who had me at an older age, assured me there was no rush. She shared that I had been born later in her life, so there was no need to worry. I decided not to stress about it too much and wait patiently. Considering my workload, the negativity from those two, and the feeling of being rushed, I thought it wouldn't be the right time to have children. Despite occasional snide remarks from the two, my mental state was more stable than when I worked at the company. Living peacefully in the well-designed and well-located house my father left us, I enjoyed a happy life with my mother and husband. The shared facilities, including gym equipment and workspace, allowed me to exercise and take breaks during work, making everything run smoothly. However, one day my mother, who had been energetically working, suddenly collapsed and passed away from a stroke. She had gone to work as usual that day, seemingly healthy with no chronic illnesses. I sent her off with a smile in the morning, never expecting this turn of events. Stunned, I rushed to the hospital, but she had already passed away. Seeing her, looking as if she had just fallen asleep, disbelief washed over me. As I arranged for her funeral, my feelings finally settled down, and I quietly cried, unable to believe she was gone so suddenly. My husband, aware of how lively my mother was in the morning, also cried in disbelief. With a close and long relationship with her, he mourned her loss as well. Amidst our sadness, we prepared for the wake and funeral, managing the reception as acquaintances came by to mourn. Witnessing the outpouring of love for my mother was consoling. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law, acting somber in my husband's presence, approached me when he was busy with others. Insensitively, they whispered, "With your mother gone, it's going to be tough. And since we're family, no need for condolence money, right? I won't give a dime to a gold digger like you." Their lack of compassion shocked me, but before I could respond, my husband intervened, and they quickly pretended to be sad and left. Despite their audacity, I chose to focus on mourning my mother rather than dwelling on their rudeness. Back home after the funeral, grief overwhelmed me, and I felt listless. Memories of my mother flooded back, making the sense of loss unbearable. Despite the busy funeral preparations, the sorrow intensified once I returned home. The vibrant image of my mother made the grief even more poignant, and I found myself crying again. While deep in grief, a rational part of my mind knew I couldn't afford to stay this way. With a deadline looming, I had manuscripts to write, and the understanding of the publishing house had its limits. In honor of my mother's support for my career, I resolved to calm my grief and get back to normal. Amid this resolve, a call from the front desk informed me of my mother-in-law and sister-in-law's unexpected visit. Uncertain of their intentions, I reluctantly decided to meet them, hoping for a distraction. As we went downstairs to greet them, puzzled by their sudden appearance, they announced, "We're going to be living in your house from today, so show us around, please. And since this is our home now, you, a stranger, need to leave right away." Stunned, we couldn't comprehend their words. Instead of discussing the matter elsewhere, they demanded a tour of the house immediately. Perplexed, my husband suggested heading to a nearby store for a discussion. However, they insisted on being shown around the house, causing a commotion that drew the attention of other residents. To avoid causing a scene, my husband persuaded them to go to a nearby diner. Over drinks, we listened to their absurd story, and the sheer ridiculousness of it all made my earlier sorrow momentarily vanish. They believed the high-rise condo belonged to my husband, and insisted that, since my mother had passed away, we should all live together. My husband was bewildered by their absurd claims, seemingly growing angry, but he calmly began clearing up their misunderstanding. First off, that condo is Karen's, inherited from her father, not mine. And Karen's not unemployed. She has a job. I explained that I was the owner of the condo, which was part of my father's legacy, and that I was working as a best-selling novelist. However, they wouldn't accept it. A novelist? That's hardly a stable income. There's no need to defend her just because she's your wife, right? Defending her like that? Are you brainwashed or something? You'd better divorce her quickly. I even mentioned my popular works, but they dismissed it as a lie. What kind of upbringing allows someone to speak like that? Didn't your mother teach you anything? You'd be better off not telling such lies. Ridiculed about my mother and my work, I was getting steamed. I had been patient, but it was time to speak up. Just as I was about to open my mouth, my husband, who'd been explaining to the two unlistening people, lost his cool and burst out in anger. "Enough already, stop talking nonsense. Don't you ever mock Karen." The two were taken aback by my husband's rare show of fury. We've explained it time and again. How many times do I need to say it for you to get it? Karen isn't half-heartedly pursuing her writing career. With my husband's outburst, it seemed they finally began to realize that everything we had been explaining was the truth, and confusion set in. Okay, I get it. We're sorry. Let's live together then. I've already told my friends I'm moving into the high-rise condo. It's going to be embarrassing if I don't, so let us move in. Still, without sincere regret or a sorry attitude about wanting to live with us, their approach didn't change. My husband, growing even angrier, declared, "There's no way we're living with you two. Just go back home." His rejection of them was even stronger. Panicked by his words, they began pleading with my husband to let them stay. "We're in a bind here. We've already sold our family home and have nowhere to live." "What? What do you mean?" It turned out they had sold their house without telling us, assuming they could move into ours. They were already arranging to move and hadn't even looked for another place, starting to make wild claims out of desperation. "So it's okay for you if your family left high and dry. Just let us stay with you." I quit my job thinking I was going to live in the condo. Their faces turned pale as they desperately implored my husband to let them stay in our house. My sister-in-law quit her job, it seems, and after constantly mocking me for being a nerd, it's pretty clear she was fully intent on leeching off my husband herself. And it's just plain rude, family or not, to show up unannounced like that. From the barrage of complaints to my husband, it was obvious they'd pegged me as the villain, imagining themselves as the hero saving my husband from me. That's why they thought it'd be a great idea to show up out of the blue, convinced my husband to kick me out, and then move in together, thinking he'd be thrilled about it. "We'll take care of everything at home, so it's all good, right? We'd like to get a little something for doing the chores if that's okay." They claimed they'd do the housework, but also had the nerve to ask for an allowance. I was utterly taken aback by their shameless attitude. I was angry at them, sure, but more than that, I began to think getting mad at them was just a waste of energy. My husband started getting even angrier with their audacious behavior. "If you're going to sell the family home, why wouldn't you say a word to me about it? It's your doing, so if there's no house, that's not my problem." He flat out refused. When they realized that they couldn't persuade him, they had the gall to ask me to do it. "Hey Karen, could you please talk John into letting us stay? We won't tell you to leave, and it's fine if you live with us. If things stay as they are, we're out of options. Please convince him." After all the ridicule toward me, what arrogance they had. It's my house and my name, yet they act so high and mighty. I've always detested the idea, but if I ever lived with them, I'd surely be tormented. Before I could sarcastically refuse, my husband burst out again, exploding with anger. "Enough is enough. After all the crap you've given Karen, you've got some nerve. Just stop asking for a share of the home sale money and go back where you came from. I don't even want to see you two anymore." And with that, he made an outright declaration of disownment. Despite their persistent attempts to cling to my husband, we ignored them, settled the bill, and promptly left the restaurant. They still shamelessly showed up at our upscale condo from time to time, unrepentant. After I explained the situation to the building manager, they warned those two, knowing that if they kept making a racket, the cops would be called and sent them away. But they still showed up, lurking around the front door, badgering my husband to let them move in or to give them financial help. When my husband finally got fed up and threatened to call the police, they stopped coming around. Looks like he was serious about cutting ties. He even went through with the legal steps to disown them. But then they started sending our phones plenty of messages, emails, begging to live with us, and asking for money kept flooding in. I got so fed up with the constant harassment that I immediately blocked their numbers. Turns out their family home was too old and inconveniently located to sell for much, and they were counting on my husband without any savings of their own. So they ended up selling what they could and moved into a cheap, run-down apartment. Finding a job was tough, so they're scraping by with multiple part-time gigs, living a busy life. As for me, well, the good news of a pregnancy came through once the relentless messages stopped. I had been worried about not being able to have kids, so this was a real joy. With this happy news of pregnancy, I finally felt a glimmer of hope after a long time. I'm determined to be the kind of mother my child can always feel safe with, just like my mother. And while looking forward to the arrival of my baby, I continue to dedicate myself to my work.
It all began one evening at our regular dinner table when my oldest son, Brad, announced he had something important to share with me. I'm Mary, 51 years old, and I work part-time. Mentally, I still feel youthful, though my body is showing signs of aging. My 3 sons, who have grown up to compensate for my diminishing energy, are my greatest pride. Brad, the eldest, has decided to tie the knot. While I knew he had a girlfriend, hearing about their engagement was still a pleasant surprise. So, Brett's getting married, huh? I guess that means you're getting old, honey. No beer for you tonight then, my husband joked. Ignoring his jest, I focused on Brad's expression. With our other sons away at college, Brad, now working, was the only one still living at home. His maturity had flourished in his years of employment, and now, with marriage on the horizon, he seemed more steadfast and reliable than ever. After my husband tearfully apologized to me, saying, "I'm sorry you're forever young and beautiful," I allowed him just 1 beer, according to my son. They were already discussing wedding venues and ring options, though the actual date was undecided. Brad wanted to bring his fiancée over to meet us first, which felt like a significant step. Marriage is a big milestone, I mused. I want them to have a wonderful ceremony. Though the stars of the day would be my son and his future wife, I couldn't help but feel a flutter of excitement. Perhaps I'd even treat myself to a new dress, reminiscing on my own bridal days as my husband continued to praise how radiant I looked in white. The weekend arrived, and Brad's fiancée, Alice, greeted us casually. "Hello, I'm Alice," she said, her demeanor reflecting the easy confidence of youth. Alice, a part-time worker at Brad's favorite cafe, had been captivated by him and pursued him until they began dating. As conversations lulled, my husband leaned in. "Ah, yes," and I nodded in agreement. "We have something important to share with you, Alice," my husband continued. "Brad isn't our biological son." Alice's eyes widened in surprise. "He's my nephew," I explained softly. "Brad's parents, my brother and his wife, tragically passed away when he was young. We adopted him and raised him as our own. He's like a son to us," my husband added warmly. "Please take good care of him." As Alice processed this revelation, a brief silence hung in the air before my husband swiftly changed the subject to lighter matters. "Well, let's leave the heavy stuff there. What kind of ceremony are you envisioning?" Alice smiled gratefully at the change in tone. "I'd love to wear a traditional white wedding dress, if possible." Glancing at Brad, who beamed in agreement, I couldn't help but share in their excitement. "That sounds wonderful. It's a once-in-a-lifetime event, so it should be perfect for the bride." At that point, Alice made a peculiar expression. For a moment, I thought she was glaring at me, but perhaps it was my imagination. Before I could dwell on it, her face returned to its usual expression. "And what about you, Brad? What kind of wedding do you want?" my husband asked, trying to involve our son in the wedding discussion. "Well, we don't really need your opinion," Alice immediately interjected. "What?" The 3 of us were taken aback, exchanging surprised looks. Alice seemed puzzled by our reactions, as if she couldn't understand what was wrong with her statement. "But didn't you say yourself, Auntie, that it needs to be perfect for the bride? The groom is just a bonus." "I'll have it my way," Alice asserted confidently, her smile radiant. Brad was left speechless, and I was momentarily stunned by her addressing me as Auntie. But shouldn't Brad's wishes also be considered? "Don't worry, leave everything to me, and it'll be the best wedding ever. Just make sure you work hard and contribute the funds, Brad." Alice continued with unstoppable energy and audacity, leaving us all speechless. What a remarkable girl, I thought, nodding in agreement. A few days later, both families met at a nice restaurant. This time, my husband's mother was there too. She hadn't been able to join us last time because she was at an adult daycare center. Despite using a cane, she was quite energetic. "Sorry for the delay. Traffic was a nightmare," she apologized as she arrived. Alice spoke in a casual manner, even with my husband's mother, whom she had only met once before. In the background, I noticed Alice's parents shyly waving before taking their seats. The atmosphere was somewhat awkward, with little conversation as we quietly ate our meals. Just as I was about to initiate some small talk, Alice suddenly spoke up. "Granny, do you have trouble walking?" "That's right, dear. Old age has taken a toll on my legs, my mother-in-law replied. Well, I absolutely refuse to care for you, Alice declared out of the blue, causing a moment of stunned silence. Someone went, "Hell, it was probably my mother-in-law, but it might have been me," I said, wanting to clarify. "I have no intention of caring for any of you. Auntie, you're not my mother, so you're a stranger. And while Uncle might be related, he's not my father. I won't look after any of you," Alice asserted boldly. "Hey, Alice," Brad attempted to intervene, but she wouldn't relent. "And I definitely won't be calling you Dad or Mom, so remember that," Alice added firmly. Glancing at Alice's parents, I was surprised to see them nodding in agreement. "Well, it's true that Brad isn't our biological son, but we've raised him as one," my husband tried to interject. "Hush, Uncle," Alice cut him off sharply. "Okay, I'm sorry," my husband fell silent after the rebuke. At that moment, the gentle sound of a fork being placed down resonated. "Is that so?" came a calm but firm statement. I glanced at my mother-in-law. She appeared composed, yet her underlying fury was palpable. They may not be their biological parents, but they've raised them with more love than many real parents would. That's not something outsiders should meddle with, my mother-in-law spoke with authority. "I don't care what you say, I'm not doing any caregiving," Alice retorted defiantly. Her words infuriated me, but I held my tongue as my mother-in-law continued to speak. "I'm not expecting anyone to take care of me. I know I'm old, but I don't want to burden my daughter-in-law, so I mostly use the facilities every day." "Oh, really?" responded my mother-in-law. "I've already transferred my assets to the couple as gifts while I'm still alive. They can use that money for the facilities or whatever they want, so you won't have to lift a finger." "Well, isn't that nice?" my mother-in-law replied with irritation evident in her tone. Even when her son tried to placate her, it seemed to have little effect. "This discussion ends here. It's time to go home," my mother-in-law stated firmly, bringing the conversation to an abrupt close. With that single statement from my mother-in-law, the meeting came to an end. Women have become stronger these days. Perhaps that's the way of the world now. The rest of us, born in the 60s, returned home with mixed feelings. A few days later, my husband and Brad were at work, my mother-in-law was at the adult home, and I was alone at home on my day off from my part-time job when the phone rang. "Oh, hey there, Auntie," Alice's voice surprised me when I picked up the phone. Auntie, can you not come to the wedding?" Alice's request caught me off guard. "What?" I exclaimed in surprise at her unexpected request. "You're not Brad's biological parent. Technically, you're his aunt. Since there's no blood relation, you're essentially a stranger. Strangers shouldn't come to weddings." "But what about Brad? He wants us, his parents, to be at the ceremony," I pleaded. "He doesn't matter. I'm planning the wedding my way. At the ceremony, I'll prepare a letter to his deceased parents that will surely move everyone," Alice insisted. "That's not how it works. Brad's biological parents were important to him, but he considers us his real parents." That thought brought tears to our eyes before, I explained desperately. "If you really want to attend, you'll have to be very generous with your gift. You received an inheritance from your mom, right? So, $10,000 is the bare minimum, if that's the case. I might let you sit in the far corner of the relative seats." "How could you say such a thing? If you don't like it, fine. Don't come to the wedding." "Oh, but you still have to give a gift. Wire transfer or registered mail is fine." "Bye," Alice declared curtly before hanging up. The phone call felt like a whirlwind, leaving me unsettled. That night, Brad was working late due to overtime, and my husband was out for drinks. It was just my mother-in-law and me at home, contemplating the situation in silence. "Looks like Alice doesn't like me," I remarked with concern. "That's a problem," sighed my mother-in-law. "Let's make her like us then," I suggested plainly. "Simple and clear. If she dislikes us, we'll make ourselves likable," my mother-in-law agreed. And so, we stayed up late into the night, plotting various strategies. The sight of us grinning with satisfaction and saying, "Perfect, let's do this," left my husband dumbfounded when he returned home, but that's another story. The next day at lunch, when I called Alice and told her we had something for her, she came over promptly. "Here to collect some cash," I joked as she arrived. Shaking my head at her assumption, I pulled out something. "What's this?" Alice asked, puzzled. "It's a cupcake I made," my mother-in-law chimed in with a smile. I heard you don't have grandparents. Try some of this. It's a super traditional one. I don't want it, Alice protested. Don't be shy. Here you go, my mother-in-law insisted, pushing the treat towards her. Alice resisted, but my mother-in-law's assertiveness prevailed as she managed to get the cupcake into Alice's mouth. Well, that's gross. Why is this so salty? Alice exclaimed, quickly washing it down with the iced tea we had served. Salty? That's odd. It shouldn't be, I remarked, taking a bite myself and grimacing. We had entrusted everything to my mother-in-law, including the preparation and cleanup. But who could have predicted such a basic mistake? The cupcake plan had failed, but we remained undeterred. That's all right, let's move on to the next one, I said with determination. I have a gift for you. Wedding money? A gift card? Nope. Alice eyed the slightly larger paper bag I handed her, disappointment creasing her forehead as she inspected it. What's this? It's a dress. I hope you like it. It's gross. This isn't my taste at all. I would rather have money. Money? Alice bluntly stated her preference, making me reconsider giving it to her. I had carefully chosen the dress, thinking it would suit her well. Not having a daughter, I wasn't entirely familiar with current fashion trends for young women. Despite consulting with the store clerk, it seemed my efforts had fallen short. A real letdown. Another plan had failed, and instead of bringing us closer, it seemed to worsen things. That's enough. I don't want anything else. Just give me the cash, Alice demanded. A cash gift truly captures the spirit of celebration. Don't you want to celebrate your son? Of course. I do. Then I'll give it to my son. The wife should manage the husband's money. That's only natural. Just hurry up and hand it over, old woman. As Alice spoke, her true nature emerged, leaving me feeling saddened. Who are you calling an old woman? I'm still spry. Just by seeing spry, actually you're a granny, Alice continued brazenly. While I wondered how to respond, we were suddenly interrupted by a familiar voice saying, I'm home. Brad, wait, what happened at work? Alice panicked, clearly worried about being overheard. We went bankrupt, Brad replied listlessly. Bankrupt? The company's gone under. Alice's misunderstanding echoed through the room, followed by stunned silence. It wasn't just Alice who was surprised. My mother-in-law and I were both taken aback. Alice grabbed my son's shoulders and started shaking him. What does bankrupt mean? Jobless, penniless. What are we going to do about the wedding? I'm sorry, it'll have to wait, Brad replied, his voice devoid of energy. Releasing her grip from my son, Alice cried out, then how am I supposed to pay the damages? It wasn't just Alice's words that shocked us. My mother-in-law and I were stunned. My son being jobless was one thing, but I couldn't keep up with everything that was happening. Damages? Ah, never mind. Just give me the gift money quickly, Alice said, no longer caring if my son was present, holding out her hand to me. Alice, could you give us an explanation? My mother-in-law interjected. Shut up. Just give me the money, Alice snapped. It's you who needs to shut up, young lady. Explain yourself. My mother-in-law's tone suddenly turned harsh, catching Alice off guard. Under the watchful gaze of my mother-in-law and me, Alice began to speak in a weak voice. Apparently, Alice had been having an affair with her boss at her part-time job. Moreover, the man was married, and his wife found out, demanding damages. Alice had no money to pay, so she devised a plan to marry my son. She calculated that if they married, she would receive a hefty sum in gift money and planned to have my son pay for all the wedding costs while she kept the gift money for herself. My mother-in-law and I were speechless. We were angry that she had used my son, but we were also astounded by how she didn't think she had done anything wrong throughout the entire conversation. I've already settled things with my boss. Once I pay the damages, it'll be over. That's why I'm going through with the marriage. Give me the gift money. It's fortunate the truth came out before the wedding, but I didn't know what to say to her. As I pondered, I heard a low, muffled voice. Don't make decisions on your own. Looking up, I saw my son Brad glaring at Alice, his face filled with anger. Brad was usually so calm. He had never raised his voice at her before. Alice appeared startled. So what if it's over? You're not even trying to pay the damages yourself. You were planning to use our marriage for your own gain. You haven't shown any remorse. Do you really love me? Of course I love you. That's why I want to get married. Then pay the damages yourself. Show some sincerity. But, Alice tried to hold onto my son, but he coldly pushed her away. Either way, we can't get married until I find a new job. Can you wait until then? Alice was speechless. If she truly loved him, she would have been willing to wait and support him. But those words didn't come from her. That's enough, Brad finally said in frustration. I never even liked you to begin with. I thought you could bring in some money, but I don't need a jobless, penniless man. At last, Alice revealed her true feelings. Perhaps that was what she had been thinking all along. With those words, she shouted and stormed out of the house. I wondered if Brad was truly okay with this. I noticed him shaking. When I turned around, ready to comfort him, I noticed something unexpected. Laughter. My son burst out laughing suddenly. Had the shock broken him? It was a lie. Huh? A lie? The company's not bankrupt. Business is doing well. I just came back to pick up something I forgot. It turned out the bankruptcy was a ruse. My son had returned during his lunch break to retrieve something he'd left behind. Spotting us together and hearing our conversation, he grew suspicious of Alice's insistence on money and set a trap for her. I'd heard that a person's true nature shows when they face joblessness and financial trouble. I wanted to test it. The result was enlightening, to say the least. Do you still love her? I asked cautiously. My son looked a bit melancholy. I loved her enough to want to marry her. But sometimes love fades in an instant. Maybe I didn't love Alice as deeply as I thought. Perhaps calling off the engagement was for the best. I exchanged a knowing glance with my mother-in-law, and we both found ourselves laughing at the situation. As for what happened next, we later learned that the cafe where Alice worked part-time had closed down. Apparently, the manager, who was Alice's affair partner, had to sell the cafe due to a messy divorce and hefty alimony payments. This information came from another regular customer at the cafe. According to Brad, Alice had no means to pay the alimony herself and had to rely on her parents. They were furious with her and ultimately kicked her out of the house. She ended up living in a rundown apartment and took up a night job. Years later, when my two younger sons had started their careers, Brad was preparing for his marriage. His partner was a kind-hearted woman. Thank you for raising Brad into a wonderful man. I'm not much, but I'm looking forward to getting to know you both better, she told us, even knowing the truth. Moved to tears by her gratitude, both my husband and I were deeply touched. Seeing us emotional, Brad smiled broadly. Congratulations, Brad. I'm sure your parents in heaven are also happy, I said to him. Yes, but I'm happiest when my parents here with me are happy, Brad replied softly. His words brought tears to my eyes once more. Oh dear, here come the tears again. You're crying too much. You've aged and gotten so tearful, my husband teased. I turned to him and declared, well, no beer for you tonight then.